so grand. Now kings hunt her shadow cross sea and dry land. Pour him more ale till the rivers run dry, or the moon stays forever lost in his eye.
Today's episode is podcast series American Myths and Folklore, episode title The Snallygaster, Maryland's Winged Mystery, or the monster that's basically a bat, dragon, octopus hybrid. Welcome back to the American Myths and Folklore series by Delusional Podcast, the only podcast where we prove your weird uncle might be right about Bigfoot, or at least just really, really wrong about Bigfoot. Either way, let us deep dive tonight into the one, the only, Snallyblaster. Wait, Snallygaster. No, that ain't right. The Snallygaster. I'm your host, Casual, as always, and today we're doing a deep dive into Maryland's very own monster mashup, the Snallygaster. Segment 1. What even is the Snallygaster? The legend of the Snallygaster slithered, flapped, and possibly screeched its way into American folklore via German immigrants who settled in the Maryland and Pennsylvania region during the 1700s. Its curious name likely stems from the German term schneller Geist, meaning quick spirit or fast ghost. Although there's nothing particularly ghostly about a monster that sounds like someone mashed together every creature from a cryptozoologist's fever dream. Now, reports of the Snallygaster, the original reports, describe a beast so bizarre it couldn't have been rejected from a Disney villain lineup for being too ridiculous. We're talking about a winged chimera that's part reptilian dragon, part giant bird of prey, and part, wait for it, tentacled nightmare. Yeah, tentacles. Because why stop at wings and beaks when you can throw in a dash of Lovecraftian horror? Early descriptions from terrified or slightly over-imaginative settlers claim the Snallygaster had a metallic, razor-sharp feathers and an enormous, blood-curdling eye at the center of its forehead. One account even gave it octopus-like appendages. So, either it was a terrifying beast, or the 18th century Appalachian wilderness was hosting a deeply confused avant-garde fashion show. Either way, you wouldn't want to run into it during your morning hike. Its screech was said to be so loud and piercing that it could shatter glass, or at least ruin your signal if you were trying to watch Netflix in the woods. Local lore also claimed the beast would swoop down from the skies to snatch up livestock or, damn, children. Naturally, this prompted a wave of panic, hunting parties, and eventually it got federal attention. Because when there's a flying tentacle dragon terrorizing the countryside, who doesn't call Washington? Over time, the Snallygaster became more than just a cryptid. It evolved into a local mascot of sorts, the kind you might slap a craft beer label or name a hiking trail after. But behind the kitsch, it's a legend that blends immigrant folklore, colonial anxiety, and the universal human love for a good old-fashioned monster story. Just don't look up when you hear a strange screech. It might not be a hawk or a Wi-Fi outage. It might be that Snallygaster once again. Segment 2. The 1909 Media Circus. In the early months of 1909, the Snallygaster didn't just lurk in the shadows of folklore, it dominated headlines across central Maryland and even parts of Pennsylvania. Newspapers from Frederick County to Washington, D.C. began breathlessly reporting sightings of a winged, half reptilian, half avian creature terrorizing the countryside. It was as if cryptozoology met tabloid journalism, and America collectively decided, oh shit, it's time to panic. The Middletown Valley Register, one of the key publications to fan these flames, described the beast as a monstrous creature with a long pointed bill, claw-like appendages, and one single eye in the center of its forehead. Other newspapers, perhaps feeling a little competitive, added their own flair. Metallic wings, tentacles dangling from its face, and a scream so loud it could be heard for miles. Readers could not get enough. Sales soared, and for a brief window of time in 1909, the Snallygaster was Maryland's answer to Bigfoot meets Mothman, with a side of a drug-induced fever dream. Anyways, one particularly memorable report claimed the Snallygaster laid eggs the size of beer barrels in the hills outside of Frederick, because of course it did. This immediately prompted local residents to arm themselves and go monster hunting. A pastime that appears to be deeply ingrained in the American spirit. Meanwhile, you have to wonder what kind of creature hatches from a barrel-sized egg, presumably one that snacks on entire cows, or maybe industrial-sized chickens. But the creature wasn't just biologically ridiculous. According to some of the more theatrical articles, the Snallygaster had hypnotic powers. Its glowing eye could entrance anyone who dared to look into it. This elevated the creature from dangerous predator to supernatural threat, with echoes of old world vampire or ghost lore. Now, if true, one can only imagine the practical consequences. Look into its gaze and suddenly you're ordering 10 pizzas at 3 a.m. and subscribing to 12 newspapers. Dark magic indeed. Now, if this all sounds a little too sensational, you're not alone. Some historians believe the 1909 Snallygaster craze was in part a clever marketing ploy, possibly orchestrated by George C. Roderick and Ralph S. Wolfe, editors at the Middletown Valley Register. By planting outrageous stories in the paper, they not only boosted circulation, but also gave the town a thrilling and highly entertaining piece of folklore to call its own. After all, nothing sells papers like a terrifying sky monster with tentacles and a taste for your livestock. Still, even if the 1909 outbreak was slightly exaggerated or outright invented, it did have a lasting impact. The Snallygaster became firmly entrenched in regional legend, inspiring everything from children's books to horror fiction to local craft beer brands. Today, its image is less terror of the skies and more quirky Appalachian mascot. But the roots of the story remain tangled in colonial fears, German folklore, and early 20th century media sensationalism. Segment 3. Did Teddy Roosevelt want to hunt? Here's where the Snallygaster legend soars from bizarre cryptid into full-blown American mythos. At one point, according to local lore, none other than President Theodore Roosevelt was allegedly so captivated by these reports of the Snallygaster that he considered postponing his African safari to hunt the beast himself. Yes, that Teddy Roosevelt, Rough Rider, trust buster, conservationalist, and kind of a man who once gave a 90-minute speech after being shot in the chest. Now, to be clear, there is no official documentation confirming that Roosevelt ever seriously planned a monster hunting trip to the woods of Maryland. No White House memos titled R.E. Cancel Safari, Urgent Dragon Bird Issue. And none of his personal letters, which are extensively archived, mentioned a flying tentacle nightmare as part of his presidential itinerary. But the rumor persists, and honestly, it feels right at home in the Roosevelt mythos. If anyone in American history would have considered taking on a metallic feathered, egg-laying sky monster armed with nothing but grit and a massive mustache, it would have been Teddy. One can almost picture it. Roosevelt stomping through the Catoctin Mountains in full Rough Rider regalia, shouting Latin phrases while swinging a Winchester rifle at a shrieking bird dragon creature thing. Adding fuel to the folklore fire, stories circulated that the Smithsonian Institution had offered a cash reward for the carcass of a real Snallygaster, presumably to examine it, classify it, and quietly decide if it wasn't a new species of anything besides rural panic. This was reportedly the first time a major government-affiliated institution was rumored to have put a bounty on a creature that may have been less unknown animal and more newspaper editor's fever dream. Sadly, or hilariously, no record of this reward exists in the Smithsonian archives. But like Teddy Roosevelt rumor, it became part of the legend's appeal. The idea that both the federal government and the nation's premier scientific institution were briefly on the same page about a cryptid terrorizing the Maryland farmers. While these tidbits might be more tall tale than historical fact, they capture the fever pitch of the 1909 Snallygaster craze. A moment when American folklore, sensational journalism, and a touch of Roosevelt-era bravado all collided. It's no wonder the story stuck. It's hard to forget a flying, one-eyed, metallic-feathered, hypnotic, octopus-limbed creature that may or may not have derailed presidential plans. Even if it never existed, it was definitely on brand for early 20th century America. Segment 4. The Snallygaster's frenemy, the 𝕻𝕠. Because apparently, one terrifying cryptid terrorizing the backwoods of Maryland just wasn't enough. Folklore gave us a second, the 𝕻𝕠. While the Snallygaster dominates the skies with its wings, tentacles, and questionable biology, the 𝕻𝕠 brings things back down to earth, specifically into werewolf territory. First documented in 1944 near West Middleton, Maryland, the 𝕻𝕠 is described as a large, bipedal, wolf-like creature. Roar. Think werewolf, but with a bit less Hollywood glam and a lot more Appalachian practicality. Witnesses over the years have consistently described it as being covered in dark fur, walking upright on two legs like a man, and possessing long limbs, with upright on two legs like a man, and possessing long limbs with clawed hands or paws. Some accounts mention glowing eyes, growls, and its aggressive demeanor. Classic cryptid behavior, really. If it weren't potentially supernatural, it'd just be a very unfortunate hiker in dire need of a razor, some deodorant. As with any good monster myth, things got even more interesting when local lore decided that the 𝕮𝑤𝑚 and the Snallygaster weren't just two separate creatures. They were rivals. Yes, folklore insists that they've been locked in some sort of cryptozoological turf war for generations. Picture it. The Snallygaster, flapping ominously through the skies, and the 𝕮𝑤𝑚 growling up from the treetops like the Batman and Joker of Maryland's Dark Force. Except, instead of battling for Gotham, they might be fighting over who gets top billing on novelty coffee mugs and cryptid-themed brewery logos. Of course, no actual evidence of this feud really exists. No shredded feathers, no clawed-up cave walls reading "Snallygaster was here," and certainly no referee keeping score. But that hasn't stopped storytellers and cryptid fans from imagining the epic battles between these two creatures, lurking in the shadows of the Catoctin Mountains. Some folklorists believe the 𝕮𝑤𝑚 legend may stem from older European werewolf myths that were brought over again by German settlers, much like the Snallygaster, whose name evolved from ℎ𝑛ellergeist, quick ghost. Others think it might be a distant cousin to the Dogman sightings reported across the Midwest. Either way, the 𝕮𝑤𝑚 has earned its own place in the local cryptid canon, even if it often gets overshadowed by its flashier flying counterpart. So, whether these two monsters are actually ancient enemies, or just two misunderstood creatures trying to avoid nosy hikers and YouTubers with night vision cameras, one thing's for sure. Maryland has one of the most entertaining monster ecosystems east of the Mississippi, and at this point, someone really needs to make a video game where these two can fight. Segment 5. Snallygaster Today, a monster in pop culture. These days, the Snallygaster isn't swooping down on livestock or scaring 19th century farmers out of their britches. No, it's evolved. Or maybe just rebranded into something far more marketable. A pop culture icon, regional mascot, and all-around cryptid celebrity. Far from the shrieking, talon-wielding terror of the skies, described in that 1909 newspaper column, the Snallygaster now lives comparatively glamorous existence. It's made its way into video games, including Fallout 76, where the monster appears as a mutated creature roaming the post-apocalyptic hills of Appalachia. Sure, it's grotesque and radioactive, but that's par for the course in Fallout universe. Still, it's a far cry from its folkloric origins, tentacles and all. And if that weren't enough of a pop culture glow-up, the Snallygaster also landed a cameo in the Harry Potter universe, more specifically, J.K. Rowling's Fantastic Beasts spin-off series. According to the in-universe magical bestiary, it's a North American creature that resists classification, described as having a leathery body, a long sharp beak, and enormous metallic wings. The Wizarding World's take on is slightly less terrifying and a lot more whimsical, which is what happens when you're competing for page space with unicorns and mooncalves. But the Snallygaster's real-world influence doesn't stop at fictional monsters and RPGs. In Washington, D.C., the Snallygaster Beer Festival has become a beloved annual event. It features dozens of craft breweries and even more varieties of IPAs than there are tentacles on the Snallygaster itself. There's a delightful irony in naming a celebration of alcohol and food after a blood-sucking, livestock-stealing beast. But hey, if Oktoberfest can have _Lederhosen and beer steins, why can't Maryland have a monster with wings and hypnotic powers? And of course, local businesses have jumped on the bandwagon with the enthusiasm of Victorian cryptid hunters. You can now find Snallygaster themed t-shirts, coffee mugs, bumper stickers, and inevitably, tattoos. Some are surprisingly artistic, featuring hand-drawn interpretations of the beast in vintage, etching-style detail. Others look like someone got drunk at the beer festival and said, "You know what would look great on my forearm? A flying octopus with chicken feet." Honestly, no judgment. It's a bold choice, and you will have the most interesting ink at any party you attend. At this point, the Snallygaster has moved far beyond its roots as a bit of rural folklore and become a kind of a cult icon. The hipster cryptid, if you will. It's the creature you name your indie coffee shop after, not because you believe it really exists, but because it makes for a killer logo. And while it might not be terrorizing towns anymore, it is haunting Etsy stores and brewery merchandise racks, which in 2025 might be even more impressive. Oh, and if you want to go to the beer festival this year, here's the deets, homies. October 11th, 2025 in Washington, D.C. Bring some fun. Segment 6. So, is the Snallygaster real? Scientifically speaking, probably not, despite more than a century of stories, sightings, and breathless newspaper headlines. There's been no verified photographic evidence, no physical remains, and not a single blurry trail cam image to give cryptozoologists something to analyze. Even if its Wikipedia page reads more like a fan fiction draft than a field guide entry. And let's be honest, if your primary source is a 1909 editorial written by a guy trying to sell newspapers, maybe don't build your zoological thesis around it. Just a tip. But here's the thing. Whether the Snallygaster ever flapped through the skies or was simply the 1909 version of a viral hoax, it's undeniably become part of Maryland's cultural DNA. It's stitched into the region's folklore, whispered about in the woods near South Mountain, and slapped on everything from brewery labels to museum exhibits. It's a creature that for over a century has sparked imaginations, inspired ghost hunts, and provided perfectly valid excuse to never walk home alone through the 𝐾𝐾𝐽 Mountains after dark. God, it's so hard to say that. 𝐾𝐾𝐽. No, I'm not scared, by the way. I'm just respecting local legend. It's not that scary. Trust me, bro. And maybe that's the whole point. Some legends live on not because they're real, but because they're weird, wonderful, and just unhinged enough to survive across many generations. The Snallygaster doesn't need scientific validation. It already has what really matters in modern myth. It's got merch, beer festivals, and a dedicated quarter of the internet that refuses to let it die. Thanks for hanging out with me on my series American Myths and Folklore. If you like this episode and want to hear more about cryptid monsters that make zero biological sense, but 100% spiritual sense, follow me on the Delusional Podcast. I'm on Instagram, Spotify, YouTube, Facebook, and TikTok. Because when reality gets boring, cryptids are here to pick up the slack. And who knows? Maybe the Snallygaster is out there right freaking now, just waiting to be tagged in someone's Instagram story. Got a spooky or downright ridiculous story? Send it to delusionalpodcast@myyahoo.com, and maybe you'll get a shout out, or at least some sympathy. Until next time, my friends, keep your eyes on the skies, keep your snacks close, and whatever you do, don't let the Snallygaster borrow your car keys.
Stole the moon with a shanty so grand. Now kings hunt her shadow cross sea